Masechet Baba Kama Daf Yod Daled. Yesterday we saw a machloket about a shared courtyard where the ox of one of the partners, we call him the mazik, gores or causes damage to the fruit, or of the nizak, who is also a partner in that, and he causes damage by shen or regel. He goes and eats some of the other guy's produce or tramples upon it. That was the subject of machloket between Rav Chisda, who said he's chayav, and Rabbi Elazar, this is Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat, the Amora, who said patur. So now we're going to quote a baraita contradicting Rabbi Elazar's opinion. So we say, Ini, how could Rabbi Elazar say patur? V'hatane Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef has a baraita of higher authority that says chasad hashutafim, that's our subject, a joint courtyard, v'hapundak, or an inn. Now, we're going to talk about, this is important actually, it's going to be important in a few minutes, that we're talking about a shared courtyard and an inn, like a hotel. It's unusual to bring your oxen into a hotel. So what were the oxen doing there in the first place? Okay, so remember this for later. Anyway, chayav behen al hashen ve'al haregel tiyubta dirabi el azar. It says here that if my ox ate or trampled upon we share a courtyard, your fruit or stuff in there, then this says chayav. So this is a challenge to Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbi Elazar says in the very same case, patur. So how's he going to answer it? Amar lach Rabbi Elazar v'tizbera matniyata mila pelige. Rabbi Elazar says, what, you think there aren't other baraitot that disagree with it? Right? Here's a Talmudic principle. For every baraita, there's an equal and opposite baraita. Not always, I'm exaggerating, but very often, if you see an opinion of an Amora, it doesn't mean he didn't get it from nowhere. It comes from somewhere, and here you go. This is going to be a long baraita, and we're going to be discussing this until the next Mishnah. V'hatanya. Arba'a kilalot hayad bi Shimon ben Elazar omer ben nizakin. There are 4 general rules regarding 4 general domains that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he's a Tana, not related to this Rabbi Elazar, said in the domain of Nizakin. Number 1, Kol shu reshut la nizak v'lo la mazik chayav ba'kol. If my ox goes to your property and damages your stuff on your property, then I am liable in everything. We're going to learn from this not only that I'm liable in all manners of damages, but also that if it's a short time, even the short time, I'm liable to pay a full amount if it damaged your short. Okay, that's number 1. Demazik v'lo nizak patur mikol. On the other hand, if your ox wanders into my property and my ox gores it, I don't have to pay you anything. Who asked you to come onto my property? I'm not responsible to watch my oxen while they're on my own property. Okay, that's the second. Lazeh ve'lazeh, joint ownership. This is the one we're interested in. Kegon hasad hashutafin ve'habik'ah. For example, a jointly owned courtyard and a valley. Notice here that jointly owned courtyard is compared to valley, not like before where it was compared to an inn. Remember this will be relevant in a minute. Patur ba al shen v'al haregel. You see, here says regarding damages by shen and regel, patur. This is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat. So, okay, he has a problem with the first baraita in the name of Rav Yosef, but this long baraita supports Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar says, don't give me a problem with that baraita. I have a baraita to support me. Okay, Val and Negicha is still in this domain. Al Negicha and Negifa and Neshicha and Rebisa Val Habeita Tam Mishalem Chasi Nezek Moad Mishalem Nezek Shalem. Regarding Negicha, see before we're talking about Shen and Regel, there in the joint courtyard Patur, but regarding goring with its horn, or pushing, or biting, or crouching, or kicking, in all these cases. If it's a short time, I pay half. If it's a shor mo'ad, I pay a full amount. Whereas if it's shen haregel, I don't pay anything at all. Okay, that's the laws for a short joint courtyard. Last, lo lazeh ve'lo lazeh, an area that's not owned by either of us. Gemara is going to talk about what kind of area this is. Maybe it's owned by a third party, and you have your grain in this one, in here. in that third party's property, and my ox goes into that third party's property and damages your stuff, so it doesn't belong to either of us. Kegon chaser sheno shenehem, for example, a courtyard that doesn't belong to either of us, chayav, but it belongs to someone else. Chayav bo al hashen ve'al haregel. There, I am liable to shen and regel. Ve'al negicha, ve'al neshicha, ve'al negifa, ve'al rabisa, ve'al be'itaha. Ta mishalem chasi nezek, muad mishalem nezek shalem. Regarding this, it's the same as the one before, regarding all manners of horn, like goring and pushing and biting and crouching and kicking. Here, if it's tam, I only pay half. It's mu'ad, I pay full amount. That's the end of the braita. Now let's zero in on the part that we wanted. Katani mihat chasara shutafin v'abika patur al hashen ve'al haregel. So Rabbi Elazar can point to this clause and say, see, this supports me, so therefore I don't have to give you an answer to the braita that Rav Yosef brought. Okay, now we solved the problem for Rabbi Elazar. However, now we have a new problem. Kashya hadadeh, we have two baraitot that are against each other. Now, two baraitot can be against each other, could be different opinions, but if we can reconcile them, that would be better. Kitanya hi bechasad miuchedet lazeh velazeh ben leparot ben lishvarim. Hahid Rav Yosef bechasad miuchedet leparot ve'na miuchedet lishvarim delegabe shen havya la chasad hanizak. When in the long baraita that we just quoted, that's talking about a courtyard that is jointly owned for both of us, and we can use it both to put produce and for oxen, right? It's we can use it for all purposes, and therefore I was permitted to bring in my oxen there, and that's why I'm patur. I don't have to watch my oxen in a place where we are both allowed to bring it in. And we're both allowed to bring perot. That's true. So you could put your perot there, but you have to know that there's oxen around here, and I don't have to watch them. So you have to be careful with your perot where you put them. And therefore it's patur. Okay, that's the long baraita. Whereas the baraita of Rav Yosef, where it said chayav, that's talking about a courtyard that we jointly own only for the purposes of storing produce, but not for bringing oxen, right? It's a joint a vegetable garden or vineyard or storage facility for fruit. That's why in that case, I bring my oxen. I'm not allowed to bring my oxen. And that's why it's the same as, regarding shen, regarding eating, it's the same as chasar nizak. You have a right to bring your produce in, and I don't have a right to bring my oxen. Even though I have a right to bring my produce in there, regarding the ox, it's not allowed, and therefore that's the same as chasar nizak, and that's why I am liable. So in fact, both of these, but we're talking about different cases. They don't argue with each other. And I'm not just backing into this because I like to make peace. Look carefully at the wording of each baraita, and you'll see it's true. The Rav Yosef's baraita, where it said chayav, it compared a joint courtyard to an inn. Now, an inn, you can put all kinds of stuff there. You could put your clothing there, and you could put food there and kelim there, but you don't bring your oxen in there. So that's a place that's so you can see that the joint courtyard there is the same, similar to a hotel, where we do not bring oxen, and therefore, if I do bring my oxen there and it runs around and breaks things, I am liable. Whereas the long baraita compared it, said a joint courtyard and a valley. Well, a valley, that sounds like a big open space where I would be allowed to bring my ox, shema mina, and so this is a correct interpretation. Good. Now that we understand that, matkif la de bizera. כיוון דמיוחדת לפירות, הבעינן וביער בשדה אחר, ולקה. Rabbi Zera challenges Rav Yosef's braita, at least according to the way we interpret it, and he says, since it's designated for produce and is shared by both of us, well then even though I'm not allowed to bring my oxen into it, but still I do share ownership of the courtyard, at least in terms of produce. However, in order to be liable, it has to be that my ox went and consumed in the field of another. It needs to be not in my field. And since I have some ownership over this field, even though I wasn't allowed to bring my oxen, it's true, but nevertheless I do have a right to bring my produce in it. You can't call it at someone else's field. I'm only liable if it's only someone else's field and I don't have a connection to it. And therefore, why should be patur. And I should be patur in the case, even in the case of the shared courtyard that I'm allowed to bring produce, but not oxen in. That's his question. Abaye says, yeah, that's true. You have ownership in it for produce, but you don't have ownership it's not designated for oxen, and therefore, regarding oxen, it is the courtyard of another. I brought my ox in a place where I had no right to bring my ox, and that guy had a right. The other partner had a right to have his produce there. So that's the same as sedeh acher. In terms of the produce versus the ox, it is someone else's produce. It is someone else's field, because they can bring produce and I cannot bring my ox. And therefore, it doesn't matter that I also have a right to bring in the produce. Okay, so that sounds like a good answer. Whenever you have a question and answer like this, you always wonder, like, did the Bizarah change his mind about this and say, oh, Abaye, you're right? From the discussion that follows, it seems that at least here, probably not. The Bizarah asks his question, Abaye has an answer, but the Bizarah could still say, I don't like your answer, my question is better. Okay, so this is going to become relevant in a minute. Amar le Rav Acha medifti le Ravina. Lema midimat niyata la pelige amora enami la pelige. So Rav Acha tells Ravina, look, we were just able to reconcile two baraitot by saying they're talking about two different cases. One is the case where they share the courtyard also for oxen, in which case it's patur because I could bring my oxen there, versus the other braita where we're only sharing it for produce, in which case I'm chayav because I'm not allowed to bring my oxen there. Since I was able to reconcile two baraitot then that way, why can't we use that to reconcile the two original amoraim back from yesterday's daf, Rav Chisda and Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat, and say that Rav Chisda, when he said chayav, that was talking about a case of a courtyard shared only for produce. And when Rabbi Elazar said patur, that was talking about a case where we're sharing the courtyard also for oxen. And actually, they're not arguing with each other. And Ravina answered, Amar le'in. He says, you're right, we really could reconcile it that way. Or even if you want to say they are arguing, it could be that they're not arguing on the essential case, but rather on the subcase of that this question of the Bizera and the answer of Abaye that we just saw. In other words, everyone would agree that if it was a courtyard shared for everything, produce and oxen, then I would be patur. Everybody would agree patur. Even Rav Chisda would agree that's as patur. The argument rather is within this case of something that's a courtyard shared only for produce. So Abaye, who says, yeah, but it's I have to pay, that would be Rav Chisda, because it's your field for produce and I wasn't allowed to bring oxen in. So therefore that would be the same as Rav Chisda's opinion, and the Bizera would be the same as Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat's opinion. That since I have some ownership in the field, therefore it's not called sedeh acher, and I don't have to pay, not even in that case. And so that would be an alternate way of explaining that they in fact do argue on the subcase, but they don't argue on the primary cases. Or you could say that the machlok between the braitot is equal to the machlok between the amoraim. Okay, gufa. Now that we call that long braita, we have to explain some parts of it. Arba kalalot haya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer ben Nezakin kol shu reshut lanizak velo lamazik chayav bakol. So in the first case of something that belongs courtyard that belongs only to the nizak and not to the mazik, and my animal went into your field and caused you damage, I am liable with everything. So what is it bakol? It doesn't say for everything, but rather in everything. What does that come to teach me? That special language? It means that even if mine is a short tam and it goes and gores something in your field, I have to pay the full amount. If it's in your field, I have to pay the full amount. When do we make a distinction between short tam and short mu'ad? That's only in the Reshut Harabim. If in the middle of the street, my ox gores your ox, that's then a short time, I only pay half. But if it goes into your property, then I'm more liable. Who asked you to come into my property? I should have been more careful. Okay, Maneh, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Tarfon hidamar mishuna keren b'chasar hanizak nezek shalem meshalem. This is the particular opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, who says that keren is different when it's in the courtyard of the nizak, because in that case he pays nezek shalem, as opposed to if it's in Shut Rabim, and the Shoratam would only pay half. Good. Now that we established that the beginning of it is bitarfon, but now we're going to have a contradiction, because Ema Sefa, look at the end of the Mishnah, Lo lazeh velo lazeh, the last case, something that belongs to nobody. Kegon, chasaz she'eno shel shenehem, the Braita said, for example, a courtyard that doesn't belong to either of them, chayav ba al hashen v'al haregel. And so, in that case, I am liable if I cause you damage through my ox's shen or regel. I'm liable. Now, what is this case? My lo lazeh velo lazeh, ilema lo lazeh velo lazeh kelal ela de'acher v'hab'ina bi'ed b'ste'acher v'leka. If it doesn't belong to either of us, but belongs to a third party, so my ox goes and causes damage to your produce in someone else's field, I wouldn't have to pay, because it says only if it eats your produce in a different field. But this doesn't fill that condition, because different field means your field. It has to be the field of the nizak. And this is not the field of the nizak or the mazik, and so I shouldn't have to pay. Ela peshita lo lazeh v'lo lazeh ela dehad. Rather, when it means that it doesn't belong to this one or that one, it means does not jointly owned, but rather singly owned, meaning by the nizak. So it's actually a case of it's owned by the nizak. V'katani sefa ta mishalem chasi nezek umuad mishalem nezik shalem. And yet, in the continuation of that very clause, the last clause, it says that if it's a short time, you pay half. Mu'ad, you pay a full amount. And that, atan le rabbanan. So this is we're interpreting this case to be the same really as the first case. That's a case of the property of the nizak. And here it says that for short time you pay half, which is the opinion of Rabbanan, but that's against Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbanan say the amre mishuna keren b'chasar nizak chasi nezek hu de mishalem. They say that keren is different in chasar nizak, and there you pay chatzi nezek if it's a short time. So now we have a problem. Resha Rabbi Tarfon v'sefa Rabbanan. The first case is Rabbi Tarfon, that in the Shut HaNizak you pay full amount, and the last case is Rabbanan, that also in the Shut HaNizak you pay half. Well, how could you say that the one baraita is two different opinions? We're going to have two answers to this. The first one is in. Yes, in fact, there could be multiple authors. Shemuel Rav Yehuda Shinena Shabok Matitin Veta Abatrai Resha Rabbi Tarfon Vesefa Rabbanan. Shemuel told Rav Yehuda, he called him Sharp One. Now he said this regarding a Mishnah on the next daf. But we're applying the same methodology to this baraita. And on next daf, Shemuel told his student Rav Yehuda, leave the Mishnah, stop trying to reconcile the Mishnah, and come follow me. In fact, the beginning of that Mishnah, it's actually switched around over there, but part of that Mishnah is a Bitarfon, and part of it is Rabbanan. So we could say the same thing for this baraita. In fact, yes, the beginning is a Bitarfon, and the end is Rabbanan. That's okay, sometimes that happens. So that's one answer. Ravina Mishmed Rava Amar, Kula Rabbi Tarfon he umay lo lazeh velo lazeh velo lazeh leperot ela dehad lazeh velazeh lishvarim. Ravina, name of Rava, says I can explain the entire baraita all according to the Rabbi Tarfon that says in the Shut HaNizak you have to pay nezek shalem for goring. And what is the case? What does it mean, lo lazeh v'lo lazeh? It means that it doesn't belong to both of them for produce, but only for one, right? So only you are allowed to bring produce there, but we're both allowed to bring oxen there. So what's the consequence of that? Regarding the damage done by Shen, it is your property because you alone are allowed to bring produce there. And so for Shen, this is in the last case here, since it's yours alone, to bring your right alone to bring produce there, and my ox went and ate it and damaged it, I have to pay. That's what I have to pay in that case. But if my ox damage is not by Shen, but rather by Keden, well, since regarding oxen, we're both allowed to bring our oxen in, so that's similar to the Reshut Rabim. And that's why, in this case, even Rabbi Tarfon would agree that I pay only half the amount, because the same as Reshut Rabim. Rabbi Tarfon only say I pay a full amount in the Reshut HaNizak. Now, it's true, it is Reshut HaNizak regarding fruit, but and that's why for Shen is particular to eating the fruit. If it eats the fruit, yeah, it's your property, and I have to pay the full amount. But for Keden, we can both bring our oxen in. So regarding that, it's like a Reshut Rabim, and even the Bitafon would agree that I have to pay half. Okay, good. Now we question this reading of Ravina, because if so, why are you saying there's 4 different rules? In fact, there's only 3 different rules, because you can derive the 2 parts of the 4th case is really just a combination of 2 other cases. In terms of the first one regarding Shen, it's like the Chatzad HaNizak, which was the first case. And regarding Keden, it's like a shared courtyard, which we also already had in the 3rd case. And so, why are you telling me that there's 4 different rules here? In fact, there's 3 rules, and the last one is just an application of this rule plus that rule. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, shelosha kelalot b'arba mekomot. Rav Nachman said, bar Yitzchak, you're right. Really, what the Baraita means to say is that there are 3 principles, even though we can apply them in 4 different scenarios, because you can mix and match and take part of this and part of that and put it together, and you'll get a different conclusion, even though you're right, it really is only 3 basic principles. That brings us to the next Mishnah. Shum kesef sheve kesef bifnei betin ועל פי עדים בני חורין בני ברית ואנשים בכלל הנזק והניזק והמזיק בתשלומין. This looks like a random list of words. This is actually all different requirements for paying damages. So number 1 is there has to be a monetary appraisal. We'll talk about that. And the payment has to be done with something that is worth money. We'll talk about that also today. It has to be done in front of a Bet Din. And also, you need witnesses who are free, not slaves, and members of the covenant, meaning Jews. Women are part of the laws of injury. If a woman causes injury or is the victim of injury, the laws apply to men and women the same. And the nizak and the mazik are both share in the payment. Tomorrow we'll talk about this as for a chatzi nezik for a short time. Both nizak and the mazik, the victim and the perpetrator, share in the loss. Okay, my shum kesef. What does this mean that damage has to be appraised monetarily? Amar Rav Yosef, shum zev lo yehe ela bekesef. Rav Yehuda explains that it has to be done with a monetary amount. In other words, if my ox gores your ox, you don't say, well, you have to pay about the amount of an ox, or 2 oxes, or this much fruit, or some other, or this much land. No, rather you have to give a monetary amount. Here's an example. Tenena leha de tenur banan, para shezika talit, vetalit shezika para, en omrim tese para betalit, vetalit bepara, ela sheminota bedamim. Let's say, for example, your ox is walking around and it gets stuck in my cloak. It steps on it. And while it does that, it tramples and tears the cloak, so therefore you owe me damages. But at the same time, it also got stuck in it and caused it to trip and fall, and it caused damage to the cow. So we both owe each other damages. We don't say, well, since you damaged my cloak and I damaged your cow with my cloak, so we'll just cancel each other out and we don't pay each other anything. No, you have to go and make an appraisal. How much damage was done to the cloak? How much damage was done to the para? And then you see the monetary amounts. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but you have to give a monetary amount. You can't just say, well, pay a cloak or 10 apples or use any other measurement. Okay, sheveh kesef. Now you have to pay with something that's worth money. What does that mean? The Tanora Banan. Sheveh kesef melamed she'en betin niskakin ela ninchasim sheyesh lahem acharayut. So this Baraita teaches that a betin can go and collect the damages, demand collection of the damages from property that can be used as a guarantee, meaning land. So it's curious. Sheveh kesef means land. We're going to have to explain, how do we know that sheveh kesef means land? However, bidi avad, if the nizak went ahead on his own without betin and took some movable items from the mazik, then the betin can collect from that. And not really collect because the nizak already has it. But in other words, they can authorize that, okay, here's the amount, you took this, okay, fine, you can keep that. So in other words, you're supposed to pay with, the betin is supposed to cause him to make him pay with land, but b'diavad, if he already took the payment with movable items, so the court can confirm this. Now, let's analyze. Amar mor, sheveh kesef melamed she'en betin niskakin ela nechasim sheyesh lam achrayut. My mashma, the first step of this braita, that something worth money, this means land, which you can have a lien on it. And in what way does worth money mean land? We'll see a few options. Amar Rabba bar Ula, davar hashaveh kol kesef. Ma'nihu davar she'en lo ona'ah. Oh, land is called something that's shaveh kesef because really what it means is shaveh kol kesef. It's worth any amount of money. Unlike movable items, if I sell you a camera, I can charge you a little bit more, right? Less than a sixth more than the standard value, without it being ona'ah. But once I go more than that, then that's called wrongdoing with money, or fraud, price fraud, and therefore you can come and undo the sale. Or if you underpay more than the six. For monetary items, luxury items that are movable, for movable items, there is a law of ona'ah. But there's no law of ona'ah for land, because land, whatever I want to pay for it, that's the amount. It could be that a standard amount for this field is $1 million. But maybe for me, because it's near another field that I really wanted, I really like the location, I like the land, I like the house, maybe I'd be willing to pay $1.4 million, more than the six. So there's no law of ona'ah regarding land. So it means that when it says shaveh kesef in the Mishnah, it means something that is worth any amount of money and it's a valid sale. So is that true? Here's the problem. Slaves and documents like an IOU, also there's no law of ona'ah. For example, if I have a document that someone owes me $1 million, but I'm not sure if they're going to be able to pay. So I might sell this for 60 cents on the dollar to you. So even though that's more than the six less, you can't say, oh, this is, I can't come back and say, oh, you underpaid, because that's part of the deal. And so this, unlike movable items, so if so, avadim usharot would also have to be included, but that's not what we said. We interpret it to be only land. So that can't be the meaning of the Mishnah. That means when it says shaveh kesef, it means shaveh kol kesef, because then the Baraita should have included slaves and documents. So here's a second explanation. When the Mishnah says shaveh kesef, it means something that you can transfer the ownership with money. Movable items, even if I pay for it, it doesn't pay you for something. That item does not transfer over to my property until I go ahead and lift it, or bring it into my property. However, land, once I pay for it, then it's already transferred to me. So it means something that can be transferred with money. Is that what it means? However, avadim ushtarot na'ameh niknin bekesef. Here's the problem. Slaves and documents are also you can make a transfer of acquisition also just by handing over cash. And so that should be included if that's what the Mishnah means. But the Braita said only land. Ela amar Rav Asher, sheve kesef velo kesef, v'hane kulehu kesef ninhu. Has to be something that's worth money, but isn't actual money. However, property, slaves, documents, they're all like the same thing as money. They have that characteristic that they are valuable and they're movable. And the only thing that is not actual money, but only worth a value of money is land. So that's what the Mishnah means. Ramele Rav Yehuda bar Chinina Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. Tana. שווה כסף מלמד שאין בית דין נזקקין אלא לנכסין שיש להם אחריות. והתניא ישיב לרבות שווה כסף ואפילו סובין. Rav Yehuda bar Chinina challenges Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, from this Braita that we just discussed, that explains our Mishnah. The Braita we just discussed says that something worth money, that's what a damager pays. And that means that the Beit Din makes him pay from land. Now, hold on. We have a challenge from the Braita that we discussed already a few times that says, Yashiv, one has to pay, and that includes a damager pays something that's worth money, sheveh kesef, and that includes even bran. Bran is just a movable item. So that means that a damager can pay with movable items, and you just told me a Braita that says it has to be land. So, which is it? We have a problem. The answer is that the Braita that we just discussed that explains our Mishnah is actually talking about a case of orphans paying. In other words, the damager died, and now the orphans have to pay for this damage. So in a regular case where the damager is alive, and so the victim brings him to court, says, hey, you caused me damage, you have to pay. So then the court says you pay with anything, right? You can pay with whatever you have. You have bran, okay, you pay with bran. You have land, you have cash, you have whatever it is, you pay with anything. But if the damager dies, so now the orphans are not directly responsible for what the father did, but the property is, the land is. And so therefore there's that land has to be used to pay for the damages that the father gave. So regarding orphans, it's specifically land that is owed to the victim of the damage. We ask, hold on, if you're saying that Braita is all talking about orphans, what about the end of the Braita that says, if the victim goes ahead without authorization and grabs some movable items from the perpetrator, from the damager, then Beit Din authorizes that and says, okay, fine, you can keep that. Now, if it's talking about orphans, why should the Beit Din say that's okay? The Beit Din should say, you can't take the movable items of the orphans, you can't take the cash of the orphans. You can only take liened items, a lien that which is on land. So they should not be able to authorize movable items. So how can you explain the sefa if it's talking about orphans? And the answer is Kedam Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Shetafas Mechayim, Hachanameh, Shetafas Mechayim. We can use an answer to Rava, and then Rav Nachman said in a different scenario, where he said it's talking about a case where they took it while the guy was alive, while the creditor was alive, and then he died afterwards. So here we can use the same answer, that the damager was alive, and before they went to Beit Din, the victim went and grabbed some of the movable items. So while it's still alive, so that's okay, because he has to pay. Then he died, and then come the orphans with the victim to Beit Din. Now the Beit Din can authorize, say, oh, you already took vessels? That's fine, because you took them while he was alive. But if they took them after he died from the orphans, then they would have to give back those vessels and only collect from land. Okay, finally, Bifnei Beit Din has to be done before court. What does that mean? This phrase in front of Bet Din is a continuation of the previous phrase that the court collects from land, and it collects from land in front of Bet Din. So what does that mean? It only collects from land when it comes to Bet Din and he has that land. But this would exclude someone who sells his property and then goes to Bet Din. Since he sold his property already before he went to Bet Din, so the court cannot collect from it. In other words, the court can only collect from things that he currently has when he's standing trial. All right, and now, if that's what it means, we have a question. Shema mina lava umachar nechasa v'achar kach ba lebet din and bet din govin lo mehen. Wait a second, you're telling me that if someone borrows money and then he sells his land, and then he goes to Bet Din, the Bet Din can't collect it? Of course they can collect it, right? The land, there's a lien on that land. I mean, assuming that it was a written loan, not just an oral loan. So it doesn't matter that he sold it before, as long as he sold it after he made the loan, the Bet Din can go after it, even if he sells it before he goes to Bet Din. So that selling land that has a lien on it doesn't exclude it from being collected. Ela perat lebet din hedyot. Rather, when it says it has to be in front of a Bet Din, you can't use a Bet Din of non-professional judges. You have to make sure these are professional judges for a case like this. Non-professional judges can judge like basic things, but this, we're going to see later, is considered a type of fine, and for fines you need a professional court. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.